On August 1st, 2025, Donald Trump thought he had delivered the knockout punch, a massive new wave of tariffs on Canadian goods, his most aggressive move yet in a long-simmering trade war. The goal? Pressure Canada into submission, bend it to his will, force Prime Minister Carney to back down, to buckle, to betray the strategic independence Canada has spent years building. But instead of breaking, Canada walked away, calmly, deliberately, and stronger than ever. And Trump? He's left red-faced, humiliated, and completely outmaneuvered.
If you're done watching corrupt elites rig the system and leave you behind, subscribe now. If you want real talk, raw truth, and zero spin, this is your channel. If you're ready to fight back, hit that subscribe button and stand with us.
Let's be clear about what Trump was trying to do. These tariffs weren't just economic. They were political, punishment wrapped in policy. They came just days after Prime Minister Carney made a bold, historic move on the global stage. Canada officially recognized Palestinian statehood. And suddenly, what had been a cold economic war exploded into something far bigger, a moral and diplomatic confrontation. Trump saw Carney's recognition of Palestine as a direct challenge to his Middle East agenda, to his ego, to the America First fantasy he's been selling for years. So he lashed out with what he thought was his ultimate weapon, tariffs. A new, sweeping tariff package hitting everything from aluminum and lumber to pharmaceuticals and agricultural goods. His message to Carney was unmistakable. Get in line or suffer the consequences. But here's what Trump didn't understand. Carney wasn't playing his game. Canada didn't retaliate with fire. It didn't hold press conferences denouncing the move. It didn't issue threats or try to outbluster Trump. It just stayed silent and kept moving. Behind the scenes, Canadian officials were already weeks ahead. Over 90% of Canadian exports were insulated from U.S. retaliation thanks to diversified global trade deals, rock-solid supply chain backups, and long-term hedging strategies engineered well in advance. Only 5% of Canadian exports were exposed to the tariff hike, and even those were rerouted or absorbed within days. Trump's big move landed with a thud. Instead of chaos in Canadian markets, there was calm. Instead of panic, there was poise. Carney didn't rush to the podium. He didn't flinch, because he didn't have to. The foundation was already solid. While Trump tried to wield the economy like a weapon, Canada's economy was built like a fortress, not flashy, but unshakable. And for all of Trump's bluster, the truth is this: he couldn't touch it. The result? Trump looked impotent. The man who promised to make Canada pay ended up with zero leverage and zero results. The tariffs didn't fracture Canadian unity. They fortified it. They didn't isolate Canada. They showcased its independence. And they didn't scare Carney. They made him look even more competent and composed. Because while Trump was playing checkers, Carney was playing chess. Canada's recognition of Palestine wasn't some impulsive political stunt. It was a calculated moral stand, timed, measured, and executed in a way that tied economic justice to global human rights. And that's what left Trump completely exposed. By trying to weaponize tariffs in response to a human rights recognition, Trump didn't just look petty, he looked cowardly. He turned a principled act into a trade grudge, and the world saw it for what it was: a tantrum, not a strategy. And the irony? The U.S. is still heavily dependent on Canadian trade. Trump's August 1st tariffs didn't change that. America still needs Canadian energy, minerals, aluminum, grain, pharmaceuticals, lumber, and rare earths. And those trade flows didn't stop. The tariffs raised costs for American consumers. They disrupted supply chains for American businesses. They delayed shipments for American infrastructure. Trump didn't hurt Canada. He hurt his own economy. In fact, within a week of the August 1st tariffs, shipping delays began stacking up at U.S. ports. Midwestern manufacturers raised alarms about steel shortages. Grocery distributors started reporting price spikes in dairy and produce. Construction firms in Texas and Florida saw lumber costs rise by double digits. And quietly, U.S. governors, even Republican ones, began pushing back against the White House, demanding relief from the chaos. And Carney? Still calm, still quiet, still ahead. Because Canada wasn't just responding, it was leading. While Trump descended into fury and confusion, Carney made diplomatic rounds in Europe and the Middle East. He hosted trade delegations from the Gulf. He opened talks with South American exporters. He reassured Canadian industries with direct support, short-term lending buffers, and backstop logistics. And most of all, he said nothing inflammatory. No podium rage. No cable news fights. Just calm execution. It drove Trump insane. Because this trade war was never really about economics. It was about dominance, about bullying, about Trump needing to look like the alpha. But when Canada refused to play victim, the narrative collapsed. Instead of looking like a strong man, Trump looked like a child throwing a fit. And Carney, by refusing to match Trump's rage, looked like the adult in the room, the only one focused on outcomes, not optics. Even inside Washington, officials are now quietly admitting the August 1st tariffs were a strategic failure. The USTR, United States Trade Representative, has been inundated with requests for exemptions from U.S. businesses. Industry groups in agriculture, mining, auto manufacturing, and tech are begging the administration to reverse course. And the White House, once defiantly silent, is now leaking stories about reassessing the trade approach. Translation? Carney walked away, and Trump is the one left scrambling. But let's not underestimate the broader significance of this moment. Canada's recognition of Palestinian statehood was more than symbolic. It marked a moral realignment in global diplomacy, and Carney's refusal to reverse that recognition, despite economic threats, sent a powerful message. Canada is not for sale. Its values are not negotiable. And this is the true cause for Trump. Not just a failure of his tariffs, but the loss of credibility. He tried to punish a country for taking a stand on human rights. And that decision will echo across the world. Nations now know if they act on principle, Trump will retaliate. But if they're prepared, if they stand firm, he has no follow-through. It's all bark, no bite. Canada, in this moment, didn't just offend itself. It reshaped its global image. No longer just America's polite neighbor. Canada is now viewed as a quiet superpower, morally confident, economically resilient, diplomatically agile. And the domestic picture? Unshaken. Doug Ford stood shoulder to shoulder with Carney. Provincial premiers from across party lines backed the federal government. Industry leaders rallied behind the trade diversification plan. Farmers, miners, truckers, exporters all understood what was happening. This wasn't about trade. It was about dignity. And Canada chose to stand. So now, in the aftermath of the August 1st tariffs, we see the reality. Trump didn't win. He exposed himself. His attempt to punish Canada for acting independently didn't weaken his target. It weakened him. It showed the limits of his economic weapons. It proved that policy built on ego will always crumble against strategy built on principle. Mark Carney didn't need to win the argument. He didn't need to shout. He didn't even need to respond. He just needed to walk away, unbothered, unbroken, and one step ahead. And now the world knows. When Trump threatens Canada, Canada doesn't flinch. And rise it has. What began as a calculated gamble by Prime Minister Mark Carney, a bold move to recognize Palestinian statehood in defiance of Washington's long-standing geopolitical script, has evolved into a moment of national transformation for Canada. Trump thought August 1st would mark the start of Canada's economic collapse. Instead, it marked the day Canada asserted itself as a sovereign, strategic, and unshakable force in global politics and trade. Let's not gloss over the sheer arrogance that fueled Trump's tariff offensive. He believed Canada, of all countries, would blink, that a polite, historically deferential neighbor would cave under pressure, apologize for its moral stance, and quietly reverse course to get back in the good graces of Washington. That Carney's recognition of Palestine was just a PR stunt to be retracted under economic fire. But Trump forgot one critical thing. Canada is no longer playing the role of America's obedient junior partner. That version of Canada is gone. What Carney did, strategically, diplomatically, and economically, was create an entirely new position for Canada on the world stage. Not just a middle power, not just a resource-rich exporter, but a values-based trade leader. And in doing so, he shattered a myth that had long hung over Canadian politics, that standing up to the U.S. would lead to isolation, punishment, and collapse. The opposite happened. Canada's recognition of Palestine earned it quiet but enthusiastic backing across Europe, in key Gulf states, and even parts of Asia. Countries like Ireland, Norway, and Spain signaled support. The UAE and Qatar opened deeper lines of communication with Ottawa. Suddenly, Canada was no longer just a G7 country tucked under America's wing. It was a bridge between North and South, between West and East. This diplomatic pivot has already translated into economic wins. Within 48 hours of the August 1st tariffs, Canadian delegations were finalizing trade upgrades with the European Union and Gulf Cooperation Council states. Carney's message was simple: Canada will not be bullied, and if you value predictable, principled partnerships, we're open for business. And the world responded. Back at home, Canadian industries didn't panic. They adapted. They'd already been warned. Carney's administration had anticipated exactly this kind of retaliation and quietly built up export alternatives. From softwood lumber to fertilizers, from pharmaceuticals to aerospace components, new buyers were already lined up in South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. Even China, ever pragmatic in its economic dealings, hinted at expanding Canadian imports, knowing full well that Trump's tariff aggression would eventually push more North American production into diversified markets. The irony? Trump's attempt to punish Canada ended up accelerating its decoupling from U.S. dependency. And this wasn't just about trade routes and contracts. It was about identity. The Canadian public, long told they had to play nice with Washington or suffer, saw firsthand that self-respect doesn't equal self-destruction. In fact, it equals resilience. Polls surged in Carney's favor. Even Canadians who had previously been skeptical of recognizing Palestinian statehood found themselves rallying behind the government. Not necessarily because of the policy, but because of the principled defiance. The message was clear. Canada would not be strong-armed out of its conscience. And that kind of moral clarity, in the face of economic coercion, is rare and powerful. Trump, meanwhile, looked small. His tariffs didn't just fail economically, they failed politically. His administration scrambled to explain why U.S. farmers were now struggling to export grain due to retaliatory slowdowns at Canadian border crossings, why Midwest factories couldn't get Canadian components on time, why pharmaceutical prices were spiking as Canadian suppliers diverted production to European buyers. The pain hit fast, and it hit in all the wrong places. Rural America, swing state manufacturers, border towns dependent on cross-border commerce. Trump's base, the very people he promised to protect, the very people now watching jobs disappear and prices rise, not because of foreign competition, but because of one man's ego-fueled temper tantrum. And Trump knew it. That's why he shifted gears just days after the tariff announcement. The bluster cooled. The threat slowed. Behind closed doors, White House officials began making quiet overtures to Ottawa, technical reviews, back-channel dialogue. But Carney didn't budge. There would be no walk back, no side deals, no behind-the-scenes handshakes. Canada's position was firm. Our values are not subject to negotiation. And it worked. Within a month, multiple sectors of the U.S. economy began pressuring the administration to roll back the August 1st tariffs. Industry groups, business leaders, state governors all demanded a course correction. Trump's attempt to bring Canada to heel had become a self-inflicted crisis. And Canada? It just kept walking. With steady hands, a unified political front, and overwhelming public support, Mark Carney redefined what it means to be an independent power in a hyper-connected, high-stakes world. This isn't just a win for Canada. It's a warning to any nation that thought Canada would forever play the nice guy in international relations. A country that once swallowed U.S. trade abuse in the name of friendship is now writing its own playbook. The new Canada doesn't beg for exemptions. It builds redundancies. It doesn't plead for access. It develops leverage. It doesn't flinch when threatened. It fortifies and advances. And Trump? He's left to answer for a disastrous tariff policy that didn't just fail, it backfired. His mistake was assuming Carney was a soft technocrat, that Canada would prioritize short-term peace over long-term sovereignty. But Carney isn't Trudeau. He's not auditioning for applause. He's playing for the future. And in this case, he didn't just win a trade standoff. He won a test of national will. Now, with the August 1st tariffs effectively dead in the water, Trump has been forced to recalibrate. No apology, of course. He's incapable of that. But the rhetoric has cooled. The talking points have shifted. Suddenly, White House press briefings refer to Canada as a critical North American partner. Republican senators are talking about repairing the relationship. The USTR is reportedly reassessing sectoral vulnerabilities. In other words, Trump blinked. Carney didn't gloat. He didn't take a victory lap. Because the win wasn't personal. It was strategic. His job wasn't to beat Trump in a shouting match. His job was to prove that Canada could act on principle, absorb the cost, and emerge stronger. And now it has. Canadian businesses are expanding into markets that once seemed out of reach. Trade ministers are negotiating from a position of strength, not desperation. And citizens, who once felt economically chained to Washington, are now seeing that sovereignty is possible and powerful. This moment will be studied for years. The August 1st tariff war won't be remembered as Trump's triumph. It'll be remembered as the day Canada broke free, not just from U.S. tariffs, from fear, from dependency, from a myth that moral courage and economic prosperity must be at odds. Mark Carney showed the world otherwise. Trump imposed tariffs. Carney walked away. And Canada never looked back. And as Canada walks boldly into this new chapter, it carries something far more powerful than a stockpile of trade deals or protected exports. It carries proof that integrity can win. In a world where global markets often reward ruthlessness and punish principle, Canada just rewrote the rules. And Mark Carney, the architect of this tectonic shift, didn't do it with threats or theatrics. He did it with patience, planning, and poise. That's what Donald Trump never understood. To him, every problem is a headline, every negotiation a show, every decision a way to trigger applause from the crowd. But trade isn't reality TV. It's infrastructure, it's contracts, it's food and medicine and machinery and families and futures. It's not a moment, it's a system. And when you treat that system like a wrestling ring, you don't just hurt your opponent. You torch the ropes, collapse the stage, and lose the audience. And right now, the American audience is restless. The voters in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, the ones who once cheered for Trump's tough talk on trade, are watching their own manufacturing lifelines evaporate. As tariffs drive up the cost of materials and scare off investment, factories stall, projects get shelved, and layoffs pile up. Trucking companies relying on cross-border logistics are losing contracts. Farm equipment manufacturers can't get parts. And small business owners who once believed in the MAGA promise are now stuck with higher costs and no customers. Meanwhile, Canada's economy, far from buckling under pressure, is diversifying at record speed. Exporters are shifting operations toward Europe, Asia, and Africa. Diplomatic overtures from countries like Egypt, Indonesia, and South Korea have turned into formal bilateral trade discussions. Even African regional blocs, once cautious about North American involvement, are opening the door to Canadian partnerships, drawn not just to its resources, but to its reliability, because that's the real story here. Canada is being seen as trustworthy. Trump is being seen as toxic. Business leaders and political actors alike are choosing certainty. Canada offers it. Trump doesn't. His entire playbook is built on escalation and retreat, on sudden reversals and late-night rants, on emotion and ego. And for global investors, that's the equivalent of black ice on a mountain highway. Dangerous, unpredictable, and a hard no. What Carney gave them instead was a clean, paved road, clear incentives, fair rules, a stable currency, clean energy, and most importantly, decency. When he recognized Palestinian statehood, he didn't do it for applause. He did it because Canada believes in a rules-based international order, in human rights, in dialogue over bombs. And for many in the global South, that moment didn't just signal moral courage. It was a lifeline. Someone was finally listening. So now, while Trump fumes and spirals, Carney is being invited to speak at global economic forums. He's fielding calls from presidents and CEOs. He's building what Trump destroyed, credibility. and that credibility is paying off. Canada's manufacturing sector is expected to post its highest post-pandemic growth since 2022. Renewable energy investments are surging. The Quebec Aerospace Corridor has picked up new contracts from Japanese and German firms that previously sourced from the U.S. And Canada's pharmaceutical sector, long considered second tier to its American counterpart, is now exporting vaccines and generic medicines to markets that no longer trust U.S. consistency. And let's talk about that pharmaceutical edge. When Trump's tariffs hit Canadian drug makers, there was a brief moment of fear. Would critical drugs become more expensive? Would U.S. patients suffer? But Carney's government acted immediately, quietly diverting exports to Europe and Latin America, while increasing domestic procurement and partnering with global health organizations to ensure uninterrupted access. Canada didn't just survive the hit, it turned it into leverage. Today, major generic producers in Toronto and Montreal are inking long-term deals with the WHO and the African Union. Trump may have slammed the door shut, but Canada found 10 more windows to climb through. That's the difference between the two leaders. Trump builds walls and watches them crumble. Carney builds bridges and watches others follow. But don't think this was easy. Carney knew there'd be short-term pain. He knew the political risk of standing firm on Palestine. He knew Trump would rage. But he made a choice most leaders wouldn't have dared. To lead not just for votes, but for values. And the Canadian people rewarded him for it. Polling numbers have hit record highs. Trust in government is up. And most importantly, the idea of Canada as a principled power has finally crystallized into reality. Because this wasn't just about standing up to Trump. It was about showing the world and Canadians themselves that this country can do more than survive global instability. It can shape it. Trump's tariffs were supposed to be a punishment. Instead, they became the final push Canada needed to break free from economic dependence. Decades of slow-motion integration with the U.S. made sense when America was a predictable, stable partner. But under Trump, that stability vanished. So Carney built a plan for independence. Not a wall, not a separation, but strategic insulation, the ability to operate autonomously, to choose partners based on shared goals, not geographic proximity or historical obligation. Canada didn't just walk away, it walked into its future.